in the early 70s. And the idea of getting down in the chute and seeing what cattle were seeing, well, people thought, well, that's just kind of crazy. But I found that sometimes they'd balk at a shadow. One facility worked really well for vaccinating the cattle, another facility didn't work well at all, and all had to do with orientation of the sun. If there was a piece of chain hanging down, they'd balk at the piece of chain. You know, most people would just force the cattle through. And I'd look at the cattle and I'd say, well, they're stopping at the chain. And I can see the cattle's head go back and forth like this because he's looking at the chain. I don't know how many of you saw the HBO movie, but there's a scene in there where they put a metal slide in and ruined my design in the dip vat. Well, I have the same kind of entrance on center track restrainer system I designed for the big plants, and people take the ramp off. They say, well, we can just jam the cattle together. They don't see it. I'm learning more and more about how people have different kinds of minds. And there's kind of 3 different kinds of minds. There's a visual thinker like me who thinks in absolute photorealistic pictures. Then another kind of mind is a pattern thinker. This is more the mathematical kind of mind. These are kids that oftentimes have trouble with reading. And then you have a word thinker. Well, I'm not very good at the mathematical stuff, but I'm good at what they call object visual thinking. Like if someone says, think about a sunset, I see a very vivid picture. If someone says, think about your best friend, I can see your face. It's totally vivid. It totally is full of details. Now, one thing I'm always getting asked all the time is, do animals know they're going to get slaughtered? That's something I had to find out very early in my career. So I'd go down to the local swift plant and I'd watch how the cattle behaved. And then I would go back to the feed yard and watch how they behaved in the vaccinating chute. And they behaved the same way in both places. If they knew they were going to get slaughtered, they should have been jumping out. And the fences weren't all that high. They were only 5'6". Believe you me, those Arizona Brahma cross cattle, they could have jumped over that fence if they wanted to. But the thing is that they didn't. What they were afraid of is novelty. You know, some little chain hanging down, that's novel. Now, if you're in a dairy and there's a shadow or a sparkly reflection, well, the experienced cow, she just learns to walk right over that. But the new heifer, she's going to balk at that. The thing about new things is new things are both scary and attractive. They are attractive when the animal can voluntarily approach, and scary if you shove it in their face. Now, if I took an umbrella and I put it in the middle of the field, the cattle would come up and sniff it. But if the wind started to blow it away, then they would get scared and run away from it. And I used to call that curiously afraid. Well, the scientists actually have found the switch in the brain. They can switch the brain back and forth between seek or towards fear. And the thing that's kind of surprising is that the high fearful animal, this high strung animal like an Arab horse, would be the first one to walk up to the umbrella, but also would be the very first one to run away from it. In working with animals, we've got to work really, really hard to prevent fear memories. Animals will often associate something bad that happens to them with something they were either seeing or hearing right at the moment that it happened. In my book, I talk about the black hat horse. Well, during a veterinary procedure, someone had threw alcohol in his face. That was really, really awful. And he was looking right at the person's black cowboy hat. So now, black hats were bad. White hats were fine. White cowboy hats, no reaction. Black hats, bad. Now, I'm going to show you if I put a big black purse on my head, I probably would get the same reaction, because a big black purse would look very much the same. Animals also get afraid of the place where something bad happened. The common thing with dogs is to get afraid of the place where they were hit by a car. You know, what's called a place-specific fear. Sometimes in working in behavior problems, if you can figure out what caused the behavior problem and remove the thing he's afraid of. Let's give an example of a horse. Well, I had this lady say to me, well, my horse just goes berserk. Well, that's way too vague. I don't know what going berserk is. Does he buck when he changes gates? Does he kick when you put the saddle on? Does he run away with you? What exactly does he do? I had to ask a whole lot of questions, because remember, the normal human mind drops out the details. Well, I finally found out that the only place this horse acted bad was when you put him in a cross ties. And she had gotten him when he was 3 years old. And he probably had an accident in the cross ties. I said, just stop using the cross ties. That's something where I can easily remove that thing from his life. Because one of the problems with the fear memories is They're very difficult to get rid of, especially in the high-strung, really nervous animals. Now, one question I get all the time is, do animals actually have emotion? Well, of course, anybody who's had a dog thinks that'd be kind of a ridiculous question. But we still have scientists that don't believe that animals have emotion. Recently, I just saw an email from a veterinarian that said, well, animals don't have emotional states. You can't write that in a paper on animal welfare because, you know, emotional states, they don't have them. But the thing that's really stupid about that is there's lots of research that shows very clearly that animals do have emotions. But most of that research is over in the neuroscience literature. The neuroscientists have known this for years. One of the big problems you have in science is nobody reads each other's stuff. You've got veterinarians have theirs, animal science has theirs, neuroscience has theirs, the ethologist has theirs. Well, I like to read stuff from many, 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 many different places. And there's a scientist named Jack Penskep, and Jack Penskep, he kind of identified 4 core emotions of fear, rage, separation distress. This is what happens when you leave the dog home alone and he eats up the house. You actually want to teach dogs to tolerate increasingly spending more time being alone. And then you have seeking. That's the urge to go out and explore. That's the urge that makes people go on expeditions to the moon, places like that. Then, of course, you got sex, you got play, and you got mother-young nurturing behavior. So, obviously, they do have emotions. You know, to say that they don't really seems pretty silly to me. Also, there are genetic differences in animal emotions. Like some animals are high fear, some animals are low fear. Some animals are high separation distress, other animals are lower separation distress. One thing I'm getting very, very concerned about today in dogs is socialization. One of the downsides of all the draconian leash laws, and believe you me, they're draconian. Cheryl, my assistant, takes her dog for a walk in the field by the church, and the bike cop came and got her, and $75 ticket. You know, dogs need to get socialized both on and off the leash, because when they're on the leash, the dog may perceive that as I have to protect my master. And when I'm off the leash, I can go play. It's also very important for dogs to learn that toddlers are people too. You can potentially get a very dangerous situation if you have a dog that as a puppy has never learned to interact with toddlers and children. See, the problem is with all these rules about leash laws, to properly socialize a dog is real work. You got to take it down to the dog park and do all this stuff. When I was a child, all the dogs ran loose, and the good news is behavior problems were non-existent. And the bad news was lots of them got killed by cars. But they went out and they got socialized just on their own. And if a kid got bitten by a dog, the parents would go, "What did you do with it? What did you do to it? You did something to it." That's why he got bitten by the dog. Well, there is a problem we have today that we didn't have back, you know, when I was a kid, and that is people deliberately breeding dogs for aggressive traits. That is just a really bad thing, you know, and if you ban one breed, they'll just wreck another breed. Now, for years, in my cattle work, I thought if I could just build the perfect system, I could get rid of all the problems of mistreatment of cattle. What I found is I can only get rid of half of them, because the other half is management. One thing I've learned is people want the thing more than they want the management, because management's a whole lot of little details. It was very frustrating for me to build something really nice, and in the 70s and 80s, half my clients tore it up and wrecked it. The early 90s were pretty bad. And then there was a big turning point when I was hired by McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King to implement their animal welfare auditing systems. And I've done the same thing with Whole Foods, where we measure the performance of a meat plant. I don't tell them how to build it, but in order to pass the audit, no more than 3 cattle out of 100 can moo and beller in the stunning area. More than 3 cattle out of 100 do any mooing up there, they fail the audit. You're only allowed 1 animal falling down. And the big plants we got here in Colorado, they're doing that. It's what's called an outcome-based measure. One of the problems in people designing auditing programs is they make them way too complicated. Way too much paperwork. Well, people fabricate and make up fake paperwork. I'm not into paperwork. I'm into what I can directly observe. You know, for aviation safety, I can sum up one mechanical thing in the airplane that I think needs to be examined all the time. One word, tail. Questions? or as long as people want to ask questions. If nobody has any questions, I'm going to pick somebody. So somebody better get me a question. Okay, right there, and I'll repeat the question. All right, the question was, did feed yards, slaughterhouses adapt my designs to be humane, or they adapted because it was a better business decision? I especially found in the early stages of things, I had to sell it on money. I could take out a man, I could reduce accidents. Did a lot of work with kosher slaughter in plants where they were hanging cattle up by one ankle, which unfortunately is legal in this country. And the way I got the plants to get rid of that was workman's comp. And boy, I collected figures on that. Now there's been increased enforcement of the Humane Slaughter Act, and basically the fear of getting the plant shut down, that makes people do a good job. But there was kind of a bad thing that happened, because there's some situations where those big plants over there may be better than some little local places, because I think we're finding in the little local plants is they're so dependent on the personality of the owner. They're either really nice or they're disgusting. They don't seem to be anything in between. There's also a real shortage of little plants. And that's something that needs to be rectified. A lot of little plants have shut down. One of my students, Kurt Vogel, worked on a change procedure for stunning pigs. It doesn't involve buying any new equipment that will solve a big problem with electrically stunned pigs waking back up, and he figured that out. That was really a good thing. Because the good news is, in most of the plants to get welfare good, did not require spending tons and tons of money. Okay, when McDonald's was kicking some plants off the approved supplier list, the plants are saying, you're going to sell us a center track restrainer, you're going to sell us all this expensive stuff. And if you want to see the expensive stuff, you can go on my website, just grandin.com, or grandinlivestockhandlingsystems.com. But most of the plants, out of 75 big plants, only 3 had to build expensive things. The rest I fixed with lighting, adding lights, moving lights. Cattle don't like to go into the dark. Lots of non-slip flooring had to be put in the stun box and the unloading ramp, and put solid sides up so they wouldn't see people walking by and see commotion. The other thing we learned is out of the 75 original plants, 3 plant managers had to be fired because they just couldn't get it together. And there were some employees that had to be let go too. Because what I have found on training people in stockmanship is about 20% of people can just stay a good stock person. And then you got 10% that, well, they just shouldn't be working with animals. They could be stacking boxes on trucks or something. Okay, right here. Proponent of that. Now, one of the problems we've got is there's real cost issues. To take the mobile slaughterhouse, now I'm talking beef and pork here, not chickens. Chickens is an easier deal. But for beef and pork, to take that mobile slaughterhouse around to each farm for one animal, great big semi-trailer, that's going to get so expensive I don't think it's going to work. So the thing that I've suggested to people is a concept I call docking stations. Now computers, laptops have docking stations, with a full keyboard and everything. Well, you could set up docking stations, which would be a concrete slab, water and sewer hook up, and the chutes, simple chute system would be there. The trailer could back up, and you'd have them at the fairgrounds, at an auction market, maybe a farm, and then it would move to a different location every week to 2 weeks on a schedule. And that's going to be something I think that'll be a lot more doable. The other problem that we got to solve is how to get rid of all the innards. Some people are composting that, but that can be a problematic issue. Because you can't just throw them down the sewer, that's for sure. And you can't just take blood and put it down the sewer, because you'll spend a fortune on charges from the city. Okay?
Do you see a general trend coming either now or in the next 20 years of people moving away from eating animals? Is there a decrease or just going vegan or vegetarian?
Well, the question was, more people become vegetarians. Well, if you want to be organic, I don't know what you're going to fertilize the crops with. If we're going to have more synthetic stuff to totally get rid of eating animals. The other thing is that there's a lot of land, especially if you go up north here on I-25. There's a lot of land up there where the only thing you could do on that land is raise grazing animals. That'd be cattle, sheep, goats. deer, elk. There's nothing else you could do on that land. I can see in the future corn prices going up, feeding out animals is getting more and more expensive. But there's a place for animals. Let's just look at chickens. Somebody down in Mexico, they have a few chickens running around. That gives their kids some really, really much needed protein. Also, soy's not so wonderful. It has tons and tons of hormones in it. Tons and tons, and it naturally just has it. There's a lot of trade-offs, and I'm for moderation. Okay, let's pick somebody else. Okay, right there.
What is your view on all the E. coli outbreaks?
What's my view on all the E. coli outbreaks? It's going to be a scary world with more and more mutated germs. It isn't just E. coli. This melon thing is listeria. And I've been following that, and they don't know where it came from. And this latest E. coli that was on bean sprouts, they're pretty sure that came out of the stomach of an immunocompromised human being. So you can't blame cattle now for all of it. The antibiotic resistant stuff is getting downright scary. I'll tell you another interesting thing. You've probably heard about Monsanto and their Roundup Ready soybeans. And you can spray the Roundup all around. It doesn't kill the soybeans, but it kills the weeds because they biotech the soybean to be resistant to glyphosate. Guess what? Weeds revenge. Weeds have now developed a resistance, sort of like evolution meets Monsanto, sort of thing. So it's and another interesting thing the scientists had just learned about antibiotic resistance is that the genes for antibiotic resistance are old because most of the antibiotics have come from natural substances. So in order to beat that rap, we're going to have to come up with something totally synthetic. Because that's a new finding that just was published in the last couple of weeks. It could be I'm concerned about antibiotic resistance. I have had 2 antibiotic-resistant urinary tract infections, and if Cipro doesn't work, I wouldn't be here.
What do you think of Grandin horse slaughter?
What do I think of horse slaughter? That is a very, very, very hot potato. Now, what I have found in the horse community, when I look at people that have horses, half are against it, half are for it. Now, one of the things I am very concerned about is tons and tons of horses are going down to Mexico, and it's beyond hideous. Absolutely hideous. And when I ask people that are against horse slaughter what they're going to do about it, they say they're going to rescue all the horses. Well, last January, there was a horse summit, and I was going to speak there, and I got some rather nasty emails and stuff. And I called up this one lady who wrote me a very nasty email, and she raised purebred horses. I think I'll leave the breed out of it so I don't identify her. And I said, what do you do with your horses when you're showing them when they're too old to show? She says, well, I euthanize them. What I found out is she didn't object to euthanizing them. What she objected to was eating them. Well, the only problem is when you don't eat them, it's very, very expensive. And right now, they're just rounding up the horses. They're going to Mexico. They go to some horrible abattoir down there, and they stab them in the back of the neck. And if you think you can close that Mexican border, you're smoking something. Because the way the Mexican border works is Homeland Security only stops you from coming back in. And they'll just launder them as breeders and riding horses and fake up the papers and take them across in horse trailers rather than in big semi-trailers. This is something that's a real mess. And I said, give me proposals on what to do with the horses. Well, I haven't seen any of their proposals come to fruition yet. You've got something here where some people ethically feel that eating them is wrong because they're companion animal. But then when you ask them, what are you going to do about the Mexico problem, they just go on telling me that it's wrong to eat them. So you get a real mess there. Going to Mexico is horrible.
Is it bad to feed cattle corn and why?
Is it bad to what?
Feed cattle corn?
Feed cattle corn? Feeding cattle corn is like having a diet of cake and ice cream. And cows love it. They love to eat junk food. Now, one of the problems we got today is ethanol plants. I think corn ethanol is a very questionable thing. There's no net energy gain on corn ethanol. The price of corn has doubled. It's trashed the chicken market right now. And, you know, if you were to grow sugar beets, you get 3 times more ethanol. Now, why have we got all these ethanol plants? It's pure politics. Pure and simple. Buying an election. Go on the internet, you figure it out. You know, the corn lobby, making a lot of money doing that. But it's, you know, I have ethical problems with the food being made into fuel. You know, and some people in agriculture will say, well, field corn's not eaten by people. That's a pile of rubbish. What do you think cornflakes are? Corn tortillas, cornbread, you know, corn chips, Fritos. Those are all made out of corn. Well, see, one of the things that's a big problem is you've got vested interests with so much money where what the right thing to do gets difficult to do.
Yeah.
One of the things this country needs to get back to doing is doing stuff. Well, let me just give you some shocking little things I read in business magazines. When I go on planes, I'm reading the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, I'm reading Fortune, Business Week, New Economist, all of the Economist, all those magazines. Well, in one of those magazines I read that venture capital makes less money than credit default swaps. Well, venture capital funds real things. Credit default swaps is fraudulent. That's when I finally figured out what a credit default swap was. I mean, banks need to get back to funding what I'm going to call real stuff rather than trading. I'll just give you another little scary fact. For me to understand, you know, money, because since I think totally in visual pictures and I'm not very abstract, how do I understand $8 billion? Well, the Denver airport's worth between $4 to $5 billion. That's what it costs to build the Denver airport. So 100 billion is 20 Denvers. The original bailout was 2 Denver airports for every state. Okay, that puts that money into a form that I can get my head around. You know, when they talk about how many grains of sand it is back 1,000 years, that doesn't mean anything to me. But Denver airports, I can understand that. It'll give you everything. Air traffic control, Pena Boulevard, give you all the car rental buildings, buy the land, all the security systems, give you all the little shop spaces. The only thing you won't get is what they call rolling stock, and that's things that have rubber tires. That's the airplanes and the vehicles that service the airplanes. But everything else will be there except the contents of the shops. Okay, I'm going to pick somebody over here. Not very talkative. Well, I'm going to have to just pick somebody out then. How about, okay, right there.
Years ago, I developed allergies from eating out fast food. I noticed a lot of real food deteriorates quickly. What is your opinion about all these products made in boxes?
Well, one of the reasons I have reservism is to keep them from deteriorating. I myself don't eat a lot of over-processed food. Now, I do a lot of talks and autism meetings, and we have a lot of very low-income people. And you know, one of the things that really helps a lot of kids, not all kids, but maybe 10, 20% of the autistic kids, to be special diets, like wheat-free, dairy-free diet. And I have low-income moms coming up to me and saying, well, organic milk's $6 a gallon or something, you know, I say buy it at Walmart. You know, because for most of the kids, you know, if you just buy the plain stuff, not all the processed junk, you know, they can't afford that. You know, this is one of the problems. The important thing, and it's easy to do a casing gluten-free diet Mexican. You just do corn tortillas and leave the cheese off, and you've got Mexican, you know, casing gluten-free diet. It's simple. It only gets expensive when you gotta buy all the stuff that looks like bread. But I can't tell some low-income mom, you know, that's making $7 an hour that she's got to, you know, buy organic food for a kid. She can't afford it. Okay?
Do you have advice for those of us who have backyard poultry, how to keep our backyard poultry happy and healthy?
How to keep poultry happy and healthy?
Backyard, yeah.
Well, one of the things you got to keep them clean. That's really important. Another problem is dogs. Dogs getting in, or fox getting in and killing backyard poultry. So you've got to make sure you lock them up at night. But it's important to keep them clean and make sure that you're feeding them so they get all their minerals and vitamins. You can feed chickens a lot of vegetable scraps and things, but you've got to make sure they get enough minerals to make eggs. What kind of problems have you been having with them?
Well, we're not having problems yet. We have ducks, and just to, do they need their routine to be the same?
Well, the thing about ducks is ducks like to get in water.
Yeah.
And just for a backyard, chickens I think are going to be easier than ducks, because ducks like to get wet and that gets messy. So I think if someone called me up and said, should I get ducks or chickens or backyard poultry, I would recommend they get chickens. Simply because you don't have the water issue. I don't have any pets now because I'm on the road 90% of the time. I'm basically living on the road right now, and I wouldn't be right for the pet. One of the big problems that a lot of dogs have, people being away at work, is the problem of being home alone. Some dogs handle that better than others. Some don't handle it well. You may need to let a next door neighbor take the dog, or take them to doggy daycare, or take them to work if they'll let you. Okay? You, right there?
We have a cat that has feline AIDS. He's getting older, but we're wondering if we should feed it more raw chicken, maybe ground up bone, something to keep his health up.
Should they feed the cat, raw meat and things like that? A lot of dog foods contain a lot of grain in it. I don't know about feline AIDS, but I'll tell you a story down when my student's dog, she had a Shar-Pei, got all these fungal infections in the folds in between its skin. And I said, well, why don't we just try putting them on a wheat-free diet? So she found some dog food that didn't have any wheat in it, and the fungal infection got a lot better. I think there's some dogs do not do well on a high-carb diet. You need to find foods where you get the carbs down. In other words, lower amounts of grain in it. Other dogs do fine on that. There's a lot of variation, but some dogs kind of go and stir crazy, hyper with energy. Then you might want to do something with lower carbs, and then also a lot more exercise. A lot of animals are not getting enough exercise. I find even for myself that if I don't do my 100 sit-ups every night, I have a difficult time sleeping.
You travel a lot.
Yeah, 90% of the time.
Do you find it difficult to eat good food while you're traveling, doing that? You got zone, subway.
Well, what do I eat when I travel? I'll eat a lot of Mexican. If I find some old Mexican joint, I'll eat there. You have to sort of find the things that are good. Wendy's has a very nice, chicken cranberry salad that's really good. I have that. Chinese food. You have to just sort of find, different places around. Well, I don't eat bread, so I have Subway as on the bottom of my list. People will say, let's go to Subway, and I go, no. I do not like Subway. I would rather have a salad at one of the restaurant places. That's sort of the way I do things. Or I might have the hamburger and get the apples and eat the hamburger without the bread. Where I really get in trouble is if I stay at the Motel 6 or someplace like that. They got pastries for breakfast. That I gotta go. Then what I'll do is I'll go down to McDonald's. I'll take an apple off the breakfast bar at the Motel 6 or the Econo Lodge, and then go down to McDonald's and just eat a sausage patty. You have to sort of figure out how to do things. And one